Great to be back with all of you in Prince George at the Natural Resources Forum on the traditional territory of the Lisims First Nation. Ovintiv is one of the oldest oil and gas companies in North America. We're also the largest producer of natural gas in BC and one of BC Hydro's largest customers due to our investments in electrification dating back to 2009. Natural gas plays a key role in BC's energy grid and economy. It enhances energy security, supports grid stability, and is a backup for renewables. As one of BC's largest exports, natural gas generates significant royalties and taxes that pay for public services. It's my pleasure to introduce Alexa Young, Vice President of Business, Government Relations and Public Affairs at New Economy Canada, to moderate this next panel. Alexa brings leadership expertise from some of Canada's top resource and tech companies and is a passionate advocate for the role that all energy sources play in driving investment, innovation, and economic growth. Over to you, Alexa.
Maybe I'll get started as our panelists have a seat here. Good afternoon, everyone. It's just awesome to be back in Prince George on the traditional territory of the Clayton Nation. And just having been here now for 24 hours and taking a look around, I can't help myself but be so happy to see so many familiar faces and start realizing that I've made my way through a lot of BC sectors. So for those of you who don't know the organization I'm currently working with, New Economy Canada, because we're I don't suspect many of you have because we are the new kid on the block, but in a nutshell, we're a fairly new initiative that's now united around 65 critical mineral, clean energy, clean tech, industrial associations, First Nations, and labor unions who are all committed to accelerating investment in Canada. Many of those members are in BC. We have Tech, Interjex, the IBEW, Infinity, H-Tech, the Malahat First Nation, who are doing incredible work on the island, just to name a few. These are companies and organizations who want to build more clean energy products so that they can power homes, businesses, industrial sites. They want to build more infrastructure, transmission lines, substations, energy storage systems to get the electricity to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. They want to build more critical mineral mines so that we have more made in Canada by Canadian materials for these projects. They want to grow our economy, an economy that's represented by all of you in this room, frankly. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be moderating this excellent panel, because like our railways, the Trans-Canada Highway, our internet network, a strong energy grid is now, and has for always been, but is now even more increasingly so, a critical backbone to a strong economy. And in a fast-moving world where demand is increasing for everything from mine sites to ports to trucking fleets to LNG sites, having a strong, reliable, affordable electricity grid is a strategic economic asset like no other. And so joining me to talk about this today is a fantastic panel. But before I do that, I really wanted to take a very non-scientific poll of this audience. Can you please stand up if your business, if your industry, if your community see a strong, reliable, affordable energy grid as being a priority? Please stand up. It's time to stretch. Come on, we're missing a few of you. Okay, now stay standing if you see it as one of your top 10 priorities. Top 5, top 3. Okay, that's awesome, you can sit down. because I don't suspect that this panel will all be on consensus on everything, but I think the consensus is there that this is really important for our economy. So let's introduce our panelists. You've already had a chance to meet Chris O'Reilly, president of BC Hydro, Cole Sayers, the executive director of Clean Energy BC, Andrew Robinson, the president of the Nisga'a Lisim Nation. Oh, Chief Executive Officer. Apologies.
Thank you. I don't want to be the president.
Don't want to get you in trouble. Now I'm in trouble. Yeah. And Barry Penner, Energy Futures Chair. So welcome to the panel, everyone. So I'm going to start off this line of questioning with Cole, because we've just heard a really great overview, thank you, Chris, about what BC Hydro is up to, making lots of big moves to strengthen the electricity grid. And I'd like to hear from you Cole, in terms of what does this mean for the economy? What does it mean for your members, for clean energy producers, for jobs, for Indigenous communities and partners? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. It's nice to follow Chris's keynote. You covered all of my speaking points, most of them anyways. But I mean, all things are there. Affordability, renewable electricity is our most cost-effective option. So getting that into the grid to ensure that we get that energy into the grid is key, because we want to make sure that we ensure affordability and have enough electricity for all potential or existing industrial customers. And for ratepayers, of course. So it's clean energy development is the cornerstone of BC's economy. I think there's rural economic development. Another key piece here is economic reconciliation. It's a key piece, and as Chris has mentioned, there's mostly 51% equity ownership for First Nations, which is huge. I mean, this is, I think, really pushed the bar higher, and the rest of Canada can follow. So it's really groundbreaking. I'm really excited, and there's been so much Indigenous leadership on that. So the reconciliation piece is key too, because upon this we're building on partnerships, and it helps with the streamline process that we're working on with the province. It's going to help First Nations reinvest into their communities and spur more economic growth. And so I'll keep it right there, but it's certainly an important one. And for industry, I think there's some really great things in there, like the 30-year electric purchase agreement is a big confidence booster that this is an attractive market and stable market to invest in. And so it's a lot of good things that are coming out of this call for power. I think we did a lot of good work on this one, and we just got to build off of it for the next one.
Great, so big opportunity, let's get it done and grow our economy. Andrew, I'm gonna turn it over to you. I mentioned in my opening remarks that we know there's strong demand for electricity to help decarbonize industrial sectors, whether that's mining, LNG. The Nisga'a Lisim have gotten very much into the business of building big industrial projects. Congratulations on the financing agreement for your Lisim project that was just announced yesterday. That's great news. So I'm wondering, can you tell us from your perspective as Chief Executive Officer, why is this important for an economic perspective to, as Chris described earlier, to strengthen the grid? What does that mean for you from an economic perspective?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with such a distinguished panel and wonderful news about the diversification of the energy grid in British Columbia, because it is nice to see the opportunities that are being presented through clean energy initiatives by BC Hydro, but at the same time, coming out of northern British Columbia, coming out of northwest British Columbia, there's a lot of work that we have to begin to do together to actually realize on what the grid needs, right? A lot of us come from communities in the northwest where we don't have power consistently, where we have challenges with power, and we're working with BC Hydro and working with our treaty partners to be able to say, how can we ensure that that is good? And then when we start to build up on projects in the critical minerals area with the Golden Triangle, Seabridge Gold, Ascot, Newmont, all the gold producers in the room here today, and we build projects like that that need that power to them And when we worked on projects such as the Northern Transmission Line, those gave BC Hydro and the British Columbian government a real opportunity to see how Indigenous groups could provide that certainty to them on building those projects. So again, by increasing that power and providing a more consistent power through the Cool Power Project, the connection from Prince George to Terrace, and building off that grid to Prince Rupert, Kitimat, up north, providing more power to the LNG or the mines themselves first, and then working on the grid reinforcement through the NAS. That's one of the investments from the Lisims facilities, that 287 coming out of the NAS area and going into the into the Lisims LNG facility, and then coming back into our communities to provide proper supports to the communities of Lac Alzap, Gitwinsif, Gingolf, and Gitlach-Damix, and then reinforcing that looping cycle on that grid, similar to the work that we did on the fiber optics work that came off the Northern Transmission Line. That improved the lives of so many people in northwestern British Columbia, and we don't talk about that enough. So again, all of them have contributed to that growth.
So that's an important message. It's economic, but it's also social benefits, so thank you for that. Barry, I'm going to get to you shortly, but I just want to remind everyone about the Whova app and to get your questions in, because I'm sure there's lots of interest in this topic, and so get those questions in. So Barry, at Energy Futures, I know that one of your big focuses is to talk about the importance of reliability, affordability, and sustainability. And you've often called this the trilemma that we need to solve. Why is that?
Well, thanks, Alexa, and thanks everyone for being here. It's an honor for me to be back at the BC Natural Resource Forum. It's always a good time to be here, but this is particularly an exciting year in the event with Site C now coming online. It's something that many of us have been anticipating for, as Chris points out, 20 years. But I was interested in it even before then, probably back in the 1990s. We often get focused on one thing or another and lose sight of some other objectives. And so that's why at Energy Futures, we do talk about, and I've been talking about the trilemma. It's important that we focus on sustainability, but we're in the middle of an affordability crisis. And at the same time, we know that reliability and resiliency is fundamental to our economic well-being. Can you imagine what would happen if we did have blackouts and rolling brownouts and weren't able to keep our industry or hospitals and schools functioning? It's a thought we don't usually contemplate because we've been very successful over the past number of decades in avoiding those situations. But complacency can get us into a world of trouble. And the world can change quickly. In a few days, President Trump will be sworn back into office. And to me, it highlights the concern that I've been talking about, being dependent on imports. I know BC Hydro has been forced to import electricity. It's not necessarily because they wanted to, but they had to. And I'm not criticizing them for doing so. We've been dealt these cards. We've had to import record amounts of electricity, 20% in 2024 and about 20% of our needs in 2023. So 2 years in a row, we've been dependent mostly on the U.S. for that imported electricity. With Donald Trump coming along and threatening to upend our trading relationship, it makes me nervous. And this is exactly the reason why at Energy Futures, we've been calling for more generation and becoming less dependent on our neighbors. We do believe in trade. Trade obviously benefits us. But it becomes a risky proposition when you have an unstable and unpredictable neighbor that you're dependent upon. I know Premier Ford came out and said we should threaten to withhold electricity sales to the United States. I immediately quivered from that comment because the U.S. could play that card right back to us here in British Columbia, and that would not be a very positive outcome for us. So it just behooves us to always keep in mind there's multiple things we need to focus on. Unfortunately, at the same time, it's sustainability, yes, but we should not do that at the expense of reliability, keeping our economy strong, and keeping ourselves independent as much as possible, and providing economic and affordable electricity for everybody in the province.
Thanks, Barry, and thank you for making it, because I talked to Barry, I think it was just a couple days ago at 1 o'clock in the morning your time in Asia somewhere, so we're glad that you were able to make it. Chris, I really want to give you an opportunity to respond to some of the concerns that Barry raised.
Well, we think of the criteria of affordability, reliability, and sustainability, to use your terms, Barry. We think of those as our marching orders, really, at BC Hydro, and our responsibility is to meet all three. And I think it's really important that we support the growth of the economy. We recognize we're at the center of that, and the result has to be reliable. We know in our province that affordability for our customers is really really important. We're fortunate to have about the third lowest rates in the North America, but that doesn't get you a lot of credit when the rates change, and we have to manage the changes in those rates and keep them affordable for our customers. And we have to make progress on our climate targets. And electricity and electrification has been the most available pathway for our customers to reduce their own emissions. So we are working on all three of those, and success for us is progress on all three. And I think maybe where we differ, Barry, is we're not aiming for 2 out of 3. We're aiming for all three.
Maybe just on one more point that Barry raised on reliability, what role does, there's been huge advances in energy storage systems. Can you speak to that? What role will that play, and how will that support strengthening reliability of the grid?
We are fortunate at this moment in time to, while we're facing lots of demands and lots of ways to spend more money, we are fortunate to have more tools at hand, and we've seen the drop in prices and costs for things like wind and solar generation. We've seen a whole host of storage solutions come available that didn't even exist 10 years ago, and this is things like utility scale lithium-ion batteries. So we are fortunate to have a big storage battery in our system, and it's our hydroelectric reservoirs, but we do foresee opportunities to use some new battery products, and we've got one planned for Vancouver Island, and we've got one planned for we've got a number of them planned for our non-integrated areas to help with the decarbonization of the microgrids that rely on diesel today. So really, one of the things we have wind at our back, if you will, is new technology and new ways of doing things, and so really pleased with that.
Great. Just, a theme that's come up a couple times has been, fast-moving world, increasing demand. Cole, can you speak to this increased demand and what that looks like from your perspective, your members' perspective, in terms of how load is allocated? Are you able to speak to that and paint a picture of, in a fast-moving world where there's demands coming from left, right, and center, what does that look like? What do you think is needed to get that right?
Yeah, it's a great question around load constraint, because Andrew spoke to, I think, a common experience among First Nations in rural areas where they come to a lack of capacity on existing transmission lines, and some may have varying interests. Some just want to be independent of the grid, and so there are technologies like distributed energy resources that could help provide some reliability at a community level. But there are other nations, who like the Cool Power folks, who want to be part of infrastructure planning, deciding what industrial customers get power, and being a key role in building new transmission lines in partnership with BC Hydro. And so I know that there are First Nations who want to take a step and start leading those in partnership, because they also want to improve reliability or create economic growth and electrify projects within their territories, which I think is a great thing to have a First Nations partner at a regional level do that. And I think at times with integrated resource planning, which is a big job, acknowledge as a very difficult job forecasting, beyond 10 years, even 5 years, given this how electrification is. So yes, it's a big job, but I think balancing regional needs with the system needs is the challenge. And I think First Nations needs are kind of pushed off the side. And I think there's been some really great work happening recently with the task force and really planning for Electrification in the 10-year capital plan is a great sign of that. BC's Powering Our Future is another good document. So there are steps, planning for growth and these potential load constraints. And I think so we have a good base to build on, but I think we just got to work more with First Nations and local communities around what their needs are at a regional level.
Thank you. I want to stay on the theme of energy planning, and Andrew, from a self-governance perspective, and when you're thinking about your projects and what the energy planning looks like around that, how are you working with hydro, your industry partner, Western LNG, the other First Nations in the region? How are you doing that?
Thank you very much for the question. I love the fact that we're self-governing, because somebody said to us one time, they said, when you're building a project or you're doing something on your land, who let you do that? And who let you choose that? And I said, we did. We did as Nisga'a, because it's our territory. Always has been, always will be. And we want to do that with our treaty partners, both British Columbia and Canada, which BC Hydro is a part of. So how do we realize on that together? How do we begin to work together to secure energy stability, like what you talked about, a really robust whole system, instead of it just being about electricity or clean energy, windmills, solar power, and how great that is? It is wonderful, but in most places you can't afford that. Anything past hope, people would say there was no hope for a long while. Why did they say that? Because we couldn't afford it. You don't see Teslas up here. You see a Cybertruck that can drive from Prince George, has to stop in Burns Lake for the night to charge, and has to wait to charge all night there to get to Terrace. And there is no grid there to be able to charge it properly. So again, when we're talking about facts and we're talking about opportunity, that's the conversation we have with our neighbors. That's the conversation we have with our partners. And the conversation isn't about a singular issue. The conversation is exactly about that. Where are the pressures coming from, and how do we address those pressures? How do the pressures for our treaty partners in regulatory regimes, permitting regimes, consultation regimes, how do those impact the decisions we have to make, not only as a self-government, but as neighbors with one another? Not just as traditional neighbors, but neighbors with towns and cities. How do we build a better relationship? We actually build it by sitting in the same room and having an honest discussion about what is pressuring us as British Columbians. Not as a self-government, not as an Indian government, not as a band council, not as anything else. But how do we actually build a path forward together? You build a path forward together to create certainty for your communities in providing good, clean power to all of our projects and good, clean power to all of our communities as British Columbians. And it would be nice if we had good, clean power to power those same electric vehicles that so many people in North Vancouver and West Vancouver enjoy. But we don't have that opportunity right now. So again, paint the real picture, and that's the picture we painted in our consultation. We know our brothers and sisters beside us. We know the neighbors beside us. We know our partners. And one of the things that we want to encourage is how can we expedite a lot of these processes? How many people know how much investment can happen in the Golden Triangle to secure critical minerals if we got out of each other's way? That's a challenge for all of us to think about today.
Thank you for that. And it for me elicits this reality that British Columbia is not a monolith, and so we can't treat electrification as such. Every region has its own weather, economic base, current energy mix. So we need to get more practical, which can kind of be boring, but will help with energy planning. So maybe Barry, back to the trilemma. You talked about the what. What are the hows in terms of how we address that? Can what are some things that you think are the top solutions to address the trilemma that some things are well underway, but would love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, yeah, I'd like to say I do welcome the increased diversification in our electricity supply. Large-scale hydro has served us well historically, but the past is not necessarily a predictor of the future, especially with climate change upon us. And we are now witnessing the risk of putting all of our eggs in the hydro basket, being dependent on imports for the last 2 years, record amounts, as I said, 20% each year, or the equivalent of 2 Site C dams worth of electricity for 2 years in a row now. So diversifying the electricity source through wind and other forms of electricity makes nothing but sense. If you think of your investment advisor and you said you're going to put all your retirement savings into one particular equity or stock, they would tell you you're taking a huge risk. And that's kind of the position we've found ourselves in here in British Columbia. We have kind of put all our marbles into one corner, and so it's about time that we're more broadly diversifying. Will point out that I was an environment minister when we opened our first wind power project in the Peace River, and that was just the start. But there's obviously more room to grow. And you know, again, thinking about the past isn't always a good predictor of the future. Again, with an unstable partner to the south of us, at least for the next 4 years, it is important for us to become more self-sufficient, and that will improve our resiliency. And how can we do that? Well, the provincial government has some levers at their disposal to make us less dependent on our American neighbors. Currently, the plan is to prohibit the use of natural gas for home and commercial space heating starting in 2030, province-wide, including here in Prince George and further north, and force people to use electricity only through heat pumps. Heat pumps are great most of the time, but in the coldest day of the year, when BC Hydro and Chris O'Reilly are struggling to meet your peak demand so that you have the lights on in your house and the hospitals are functioning, etc., that is when the heat pumps will become the least efficient in those coldest days. So the provincial government could take some of the burden and multiple billions of dollars of borrowed money off the table and not have to spend that money to meet that peak demand if we move to more of a hybrid system and acknowledge our existing natural gas network in British Columbia that's already been paid for. It's already there, the infrastructure's there, and allow for hybrid heating systems and contemplate that going forward so that in the coldest day of the year, the heat pumps can turn off and the natural gas furnaces can kick in, maybe only for a few hours a year, maybe a few days, but to shave that peak. Because even though it's only a few hours, the utility is required by law to build to meet that peak. And just by making that one change alone, we can save ourselves billions of dollars collectively and take a lot of stress off of our system and make us less dependent on our neighbors importing electricity in the middle of winter when they themselves are going to be needing it more. A recent report before Christmas, the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation pointed out that by 2027, British Columbia could be at risk of maintaining reliability standards, you know, and a sufficient reserve margin, because the Pacific Northwest itself will be getting short. So turning to them to import during our peak period is becoming an increasingly risky proposition. So again, we just emphasize that we do have policy levers to help insulate ourselves from President Trump to some extent. And we can do that by adjusting the Clean BC targets and requirements for phasing out the use of natural gas for commercial heating and relaxing the EV mandates that say that in British Columbia, 90% of all vehicles sold by the 2030 model year, the 2030 model year have to be EVs. That alone is going to put more demand on the grid going forward. So there are a few things we can do to just take some of the pressure off, save ourselves some money collectively, and make ourselves less dependent on our American neighbors.
Thanks, Barry. I'm going to let, after a round of applause, I will hand it over to Chris.
Yeah, I just want to comment on a couple things you said there, Barry. So I just want to reiterate, we are maintaining the self-sufficiency in the province, which has always been about average water, as it was determined back in the day by your government that you were part of. And what that means is we do import in lower water years and export in higher water years. Over the peaks, we've always maintained as part of that enough to meet our peak loads. And so during the big cold snap we had last January, where in Alberta they were sending out cell phone warnings telling people to reduce their usage, and similar situation in Washington State. We were net exporters over the peak, and that's always been an important thing to make sure we have the capacity. The comment I would make about electric vehicles and heat pumps is they have been a good way to help us reduce our emissions here in the province, and I think perhaps a little too much focus has been given to the edge case of when people talk about 100% or everything, we have seen heat pumps and EVs come on at a pretty good pace in the province. We actually have more heat pumps here in our province than we have EVs, so just over 200,000 heat pumps. And the pace of these transitions, I think, is such that we will be able to keep up and manage. We absolutely get our responsibility to ensure we're meeting demand and including meeting the peaks, and that's a big deal in utilities. But I think it's also important that we find ways to reduce our emissions. And again, it's 3 out of 3 goals that we're looking for: reliability, affordability, and sustainability. And 2 out of 3, I don't think is going to cut it for us.
Just on the affordability, and it's not your issue over at BC Hydro, and beyond your control, but the federal government just this week announced that they've run out of money for the EV incentive. So up until last week, you could get $5,000 from the federal government to reduce the cost of moving to EVs. That money's now evaporated. In British Columbia, the incentive has also been curtailed. 75% of the electric vehicles no longer qualify, and they tend to be more expensive. So there are a number of things when you're talking about affordability. Again, it all circles back, and we still don't know what the cost will be, when Site C comes online and the $5 billion in the new wind power projects and solar projects that have just been signed. Just exactly how that will trickle down to our rates as consumers in British Columbia, we don't yet know the answer to how that will move our rates forward. So just expressing a note of caution here that there are multiple things coming at us, and government can control some of those costs and take some of the burden off of British Columbians.
Thanks, Barry. I want to get to our HUVA questions because there's a few hot ones that have made it to the top of the feed. One which is about the wind farms being exempt from environmental assessment, and maybe I'll ask Cole to take this one on. With those projects, those 9 wind projects moving forward, what kind of conversations are being had around how those will still move with the highest level of environmental integrity and recognition of Indigenous rights?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the exemption of the EAO does not mean exemption of all oversight. There's still a robust environmental permitting process that has high standards in addition to the First Nations zone. Some of these First Nations have their own laws and their own processes that the IPPs are going to follow, and they acknowledge. So there's been a lot of thought put into these projects already. So I think that's what the key messaging is, that it's not no oversight. There's actually still quite a lot of oversight, and so we still have a lot to work to around working to ensure that it's an efficient process, but also to ensure the integrity of the process is going to remain there, and that we can still achieve our objective, which is building these projects on time so we can get that affordable renewable electricity onto the grid so that we can maintain rates to be affordable.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on
Well,
that?
just to add, I mean, I think that was a provincial government decision, and I think what they saw as there's an urgent need to bring these environmental projects into service, and this was a way to do that. And I think they're comforted by the fact that there's such a high degree of First Nations ownership and control in these projects, and of course it doesn't take away from the consultation obligations and the other permitting that Cole talked about. So I think it's a balanced decision, just really trying to move things forward in a positive way.
I want to touch on, we talked a little bit about load allocation, but I see that this is a question that's come up that lots of folks have voted for, and really about how BC Hydro is going to prioritize different large industrial sectors, and I know that there's an audience here from many of those sectors. So if you could speak to that, and if anyone else wants to jump in, that would be fantastic.
Maybe the quick answer is we don't prioritize, and we're here to get customers connected and support the economy and the growth of our society. And as I said, we know we're at the center of that. So when I talk about our work to connect new customers, it can be challenging because we've got lots of customers. Not all of them we know are going to proceed. Many will, and we know their needs are going to change over the course of their decision cycles. So really quickly, what we try and do is we stay close to our customers. We've got a great team of key account managers who are working with customers through their decision cycles, understanding their needs as they evolve, and so we can match the cadence of their decision making. We try to aggregate customer demand and different among multiple customers around individual pieces of infrastructure. You'll recall we did that with the DCAT line and the PRES line. Those were in the piece, and now we're doing that with the North Coast transmission line. We'd like to do that in the Montney, and that is an approach that's less dependent on an individual customer and what they do. And the third really is bringing urgency to that work, as you heard the Premier speak to and Minister Dix, and we are trying to do that every day. And a really small example of that for me is I meet every month with our key account management team, and we go through the list of customers and just understanding what's changed, and we have a risk score on the projects and focus on the higher ones, understanding what kind of things we need to do and actions we need to move forward into BC Hydro to ensure we meet the needs. But I can't underestimate what a focus that is in the organization, that we have to have the system there and we have to have the power there to support all the work that you're doing around the province.
Great, thanks. We have 6.5 minutes left, and I honestly feel like this conversation could go on for another 2 hours or 2 days. But I do want to ask one question that I want all of you to respond to in like a minute. And I'm going to use a scenario. It's 10 years from now. Our economy is the strongest it's ever been. GDP is at an all-time high. Unemployment is low. Jacques Finlayson, who I don't think is here today, is pumping out charts demonstrating as much left, right, and center. He is praising government, maybe perhaps celebrating government. Too far? But nonetheless, that is where we are. And a big reason for that is because of a strong energy grid. What was the number one thing that occurred over that period of time to get us to this place? I will start with Barry.
I think what would help get us there is a balanced approach to our energy planning and looking at our energy systems in an integrated way. Typically, BC Hydro has to go through their integrated resource process at the Utilities Commission. It takes years to complete, but it's looking at BC Hydro. It's not looking at the parallel system, the natural gas network that is also delivering on cold days twice as much energy to us as the BC Hydro grid. So we tend to look at things for planning in isolation. And I know the Clean BC plan contemplates trying to, again, phase out natural gas for home heating going forward and for commercial heating too. I just think that's unrealistic and it's dangerous. And I think we need to combine those two systems for our forward planning and think about how they can continue to work in tandem and complement each other. Because I just really don't think it's realistic and affordable or reliable to think that we're going to completely depend on the BC Hydro system to provide our energy needs entirely.
Thanks. Andrew.
10 years from now, if we were able to accomplish that, I couldn't agree more, right? That it has to be a diverse approach, and it's like going down to the vineyards in the Okanagan and going to Vincor and seeing them with all their different wines and all your different selection. And you get to choose, and that's Okanagan wine. You get to go anywhere in this province and buy fruits and enjoy the different variety of that. It's the same way we need to think about this as a collective, as a people of this province and the people of this country, because the pressures from the outside are going to start hurting us so much that we aren't going to be able to react and respond to it in 5 years. Because what are we going to do when the critical minerals tap is shut off and importing all the critical minerals that we need for these fancy batteries are going to close off, and all of our mines in the north are able to provide those critical minerals to us? When are we going to nationalize these resources and start to focus on them more from that perspective to say we need part of this, and part of this to be able to achieve what we need to achieve as Canadians? Where's that pride in being Canadian? Where is that for all of us? So we don't listen to the rhetoric of somebody in the South making statements such as he's making, and we're secure in who we are. That's where I'd like to be. I'd like to be in a place where we can secure that, have a clean energy, have a solid grid, and have our own power, that where we don't have to import power, because we shouldn't be doing that, because we should be working together to be able to achieve what we need to achieve as British Columbians. And you heard the Premier talk about that yesterday. Cedar LNG, LNG Canada coming online, Lisims LNG, and the opportunities that exist within all of those projects to make BC great again.
Cole, you're up.
10 years from now, I hope that we've gone through several rounds of procurement and we've had a clear pathway for that. And First Nations, continuing to play a leading role in that. I hope that, looking forward, I hope that we can also drive down emissions. I've got a son, and so, every year wildfires are a threat. I mean, we're living in it. We're living it now, so we can't forget emissions in this conversation. And so clean electricity is the most forward pathway there. And we live in a province where we have a really great hydroelectric assets. We're incorporating affordable renewable electricity. So we have a really good foundation for building economic growth on top of that. So we have some really good, strong foundations. We just need to start planning ahead much more fervently and thoughtfully with communities. And I think that's it.
Well, yeah, in 10 years, we'll be looking back fondly on the ribbon cutting for the North Coast transmission line, which we will have developed jointly with the 14 First Nations along the way in a 50-50 partnership, and we'll remember that it was built on time and on budget, and it will be supporting just an unbelievable expansion in industrial development in the northwest corner of the province, including natural gas exports and critical mineral developments, port expansions, and the like. And as a result, we will have diversified the Western Canadian exports through the Port of Prince Rupert to Asian markets, and helped overcome our overdependence on our neighbor to the south. So I think that will be quite a notable thing to look back on, and we'll have established through that a model that is repeatable across the province for joint ownerships with First Nations on transmission line, and we'll be really proud to have achieved all that in 10 years.
Awesome. Well, I know that I'm excited about making this vision come to be and working with all of you to making it a reality. So thanks to an excellent panel for this great conversation, and hopefully we'll get to do a round two sometime.
Thank you very much, Alexa. I'd now like to invite Doug Slater, Vice President for Indigenous Relations and Regulatory Affairs from Fortis BC, one of our generous platinum sponsors of the event, to thank our speakers.
Thank you, Logan. On behalf of Fortis BC, I am honored to have the opportunity to thank our panel today and for the opportunity back here in Prince George for another great conference. Strengthening our energy systems to deliver on our economic, reconciliation, and our many other ambitions is an important issue that we at Fortis BC and those on the panel spend a great deal of time thinking about. Energy is important to most everything we do and most everything we plan to do. And that's why I really appreciated the perspectives of the panel today, the creative ideas brought to this discussion, and the progress. So please join me in thanking our panelists as well as for the keynote. So thank you, Andrew, Barry, Cole, Chris, and our expert moderator, Alexa, for an engaging discussion. Well done. Thank you.